Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:06 now as we head into our fourth hour this morning. If you missed any of our program, please do subscribe to our podcast, download it so you don't miss a darn thing. Coming up in 30 minutes, you're going to hear from the elections correspondent at the Federalist, Breccan Thies. He's going to ask about how the Hurricane Helene devastation in North Carolina and Georgia could affect the turnout and votes in those two critically important states. I am Larry O'Connor. That right there is Patrice Onwuka. Good morning, Patrice.
Good morning. Happy Friday.
And to you as well. And it's a happy Friday in Northern Virginia as Vince Coglianese and his trusty sidekick, Corey Inganamort, his producer, have been heading out to various early voting locations all across Northern Virginia for the last several weeks. And this week, Vince, where in the world is Vince Coglianese this week?
Oh, baby, I'm out in Loudoun County. I just got here. In fact, we're not even open yet at this early voting location because it starts at 8:30 out in Loudoun County. It's a little foggy out here this morning.
Okay.
But already tons of people are out here getting ready for the voters to arrive. Look
at that. On-the-ground traffic reporting from Vince. You get nothing extra in the paycheck for that one, Coglianese. So 8:30. That means anybody who's out in the area or driving around in Northern Virginia, you got half an hour to get there, and obviously you're going to be there for a while. Coffee and donuts, I understand, is on the menu.
Oh, yeah. Army of Parents providing the coffee and donuts this morning. So we have so many great listeners and groups out here in Loudoun County. I'm kind of expecting this might be one of the biggest ones, if not the biggest one we do yet.
Excellent. This is at the County Office of Elections. That's 750 Miller Drive, anybody who might be in the area.
So, Vince.
Yes, indeed. And each of these counties, they usually, right now at this phase of early voting, have one location that's open in the morning. The rest typically open in the afternoons. This is the one that opens in the morning in Loudoun County.
So, Vince, there's been a lot that's happened over the past week since the last time that you were hitting up an early voting location. What are you expecting to hear from some of the voters this week? I can imagine the debate between the senatorial candidates will be on their minds. What are you expecting to hear from folks?
Well, the big thing that I wonder for everybody, no matter where you are, where you fall traditionally on the political spectrum, is have you had enough yet? I mean, this is how much misery can we possibly endure before we're like, we need a change? I mean, this week, for instance, just watching what's happening to our brothers and sisters, Americans who are being crushed by the aftermath of Hurricane Helene, and then finding out that the DHS has been dumping dollars into paying for illegal foreign nationals, and then now they're coming hat in hand and saying, sorry, we don't have enough to take care of Americans who suffer due to hurricanes. I just think that when you see stories like that, those types of betrayals should get you out of bed to the polls and voting out the guys who are currently doing that to you.
Hey, Vince, you were one of the clear-eyed analysts after the presidential debate that said, everybody in this town thinks that Kamala won hands down, but this isn't about impressing, TV analysts. This is about impressing voters. And we're vindicated with that opinion because in Virginia, according to a new poll from VCU, Kamala Harris, who still enjoys a lead in that poll, but she lost 4 points to Trump after that debate. That debate, I think, is one of the perfect examples of how media analysts and inside the Beltway political types look at events versus how real voters look at events.
Yeah, that's true. And also, I think the thing that we often forget, those of us who are very steeped in this, is like we'll watch all the details of a particular television event. But what you have to realize is voters aren't, by and large, watching long television events most of the time anyway. They're consuming them because they have busy lives on social media. They're picking up some of the viral moments. They're sharing them amongst their friends, and they're forming judgments based on a lot of that. And that's an area in which Trump thrives. He's straight to the point. He makes his point. He doesn't dress it up, and people like that about him. I think J.D. Vance had a lot of success this week with that. Also, Hung Cao in his debate against Tim Kaine this week. Same thing. I mean, if you were to watch that debate start to finish, you're looking at Tim Kaine, a guy who's a polished politician, who's been doing this for many years, and then Hung Cao, an American who cares about his country, who'd like to make a difference. And Hung Cao was the only one who scored every viral moment. It was the only one. And I think that's compelling. And I think Virginia is a lot closer than people give it credit for. You're looking at all these Virginia counties. They have big turnout numbers right now. And obviously, it's a little bit hard to compare it to 2020 because a lot of Republican voters just didn't trust the early voting process back then. here they are showing up, and it could bode well for the Trump campaign and all those other down-ticket Republicans.
Well, and that's a nod of the hat to Governor Youngkin, who put so much effort in the registration process and the early voting and getting Republicans to turn out to vote. The other big story today is that the unions, the dock workers, their strike has been averted. I think they're getting a little bit of a sweetheart deal. Probably not the 77% increase they're looking forward to, but they got a little bit more than they were asking for. That's going to hit. I'm sure that's going to be on Virginia voters' minds because they're ports in Virginia, lots of workers who would have been affected, and frankly, all of our wallets that would have been affected because of, shortages or price increases on all these goods that couldn't get processed through our ports.
Yeah, I don't know about you. I've been kind of suspicious of everything about the dock worker strike because for a whole bunch of reasons. But one, I know it just introduces more chaos in these final 30 or so days ahead of the election. That's not good for the incumbent party. And of course, they put Biden in an impossible position of either the economy goes to shambles or he betrays the unions by invoking Taft-Hartley. And it's just like a perfect political storm. I was suspicious that they would say something like, and maybe they will today, that, Kamala Harris negotiated the conclusion. Look at her. She's so strong. And so we might get that storyline today. But I will say, I want to give credit to Ron DeSantis.
Yes.
He pulled off, I think, a pretty impressive move yesterday because he said, no, I'm sending the National Guard in. We're going to get these ports back open. And by the end of the day, the port workers said, okay, the strike is over. So if anything, Ron DeSantis may have blunted whatever kind of maneuvering the Democrats thought they were going to pull off because DeSantis looked like he kind of forced everybody's hand.
Yeah, I think you're right. We played audio of DeSantis earlier in the program specifically calling that out. And listen, if he was able to do that and the National Guard frees up the ports in Florida, that solves the problem because every single one of those ships waiting across the eastern seaboard, just head to Florida and you'll get your stuff in. Hey, Vince, we're speaking with Vince Coglianese. Everyone can recognize his voice, of course. Yeah. Vince, you said that things start there in Leesburg at 8:30. Give us a reflection here. You've been in Fairfax on the first day of open early voting, and you were in Arlington last week. What do the numbers look at from your perspective? And obviously it's anecdotal, but how's it looking in terms of early voting on these Fridays, Republican versus Democrat?
Well, there's no question that just the sheer number of bodies here are Republicans on the days that we've been out here on these Fridays, which is great. And it's funny because, in Fairfax County, not a total surprise. There's a huge Republican crowd there, although, again, minority in Fairfax County. Arlington was the one where I was really interested to see how that would turn out. And it was funny because last week, the poll workers, the Republican poll watchers kept coming out of the polling place and they were laughing. They said, all these Democrats are standing in line. And they all seem so nervous because they keep saying to each other, and we can hear them, they're like, there's all those Trump people outside. There's Trump people everywhere. So they were overwhelmed by the which was great. And I think we'll have another great morning this morning in Loudon.
Real fast, Vince, were they shocked because they were voting, or were they shocked that they even lived amongst them? Like in our county?
Honestly, I think it's the latter. I think Arlington they're so used to terrorizing Trump supporters in silence. They're annoyed that they dare show their faces in public together. Oh.
Yeah, I think that's called the silent majority. All right, Vincent, have fun out there. And thank you to Army of Parents for providing the coffee and donuts. That's fantastic. They're a great group.
Yeah,
I've done some things with them out there. Yeah, and give everyone hugs for us. Actually,
I will.
Yeah, actually,
Corey's pulling in right now with the WMAL truck, so
excellent.
you'll be able to find us easily.
And I'm kidding. No hugs. Vince
just high five.
Yeah, Vince is very he's persnickety about his personal space, and we don't want you violating that. All right, so just high five. Maybe fist bumps.
You got it.
He's got that OCD thing. Vince is constantly washing his hands. It's really, I'm sorry, Vince. All right. Yeah, actually, you know what? Give Vince a French kiss for us when you see him. Yeah, go. Yeah, absolutely. Slip him the tongue. Thanks, Vince.
Have a good one.
Thanks for nothing, Larry.
It's 8:15. Yeah, it could turn out well. WMAL traffic and weather every 10 minutes first on the Thies with Jamie Whitten in seriously every one of our nightmare when we're doing a personal appearance.
I'm sure.
Someone comes in for the kiss. Here's Jamie Whitten in the Hadid Carpet Cleaning Traffic Center.
It can't turn out well. All right.
Traffic and weather brought to you by Hadid Carpet Cleaning.
All right, I hate to change the tone of our fun this morning, but this is a tragic story out of the Hurricane Helene devastation in western North Carolina. Now, I want to frame this properly because this is emotional. It's horrible, but it also needs to be framed within the context of the lack of leadership coming from the White House and coming from the Biden administration at a time when Kamala Harris does a photo op in Georgia as she's sitting behind the table, the conference table at FEMA, where she doesn't answer any questions, and then does a photo op where she's, she's announcing that everybody gets $750 as people's homes are destroyed and they're still recovering dead bodies in treetops and such. And when Joe Biden comes back from visiting the storm area yesterday, and when asked, what do the states in the storm zone need, this is how the exchange went.
What do the states in the storm zone need, Mr. President?
Okay.
What do the states in the storm zone, what do they need after what you saw today?
Oh, in the storm zone?
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what storm you're talking about. They're getting everything they need. And they're very happy across the board.
Yeah, I don't know what's worse about that, the fact that he was befuddled and didn't know what storm he was talking about. I'm sorry, he just came from Hurricane Helene storm zone. Or this last part.
And they're very happy across the board.
They're very happy across the board. All right, well, framed within that context of the Biden administration and Joe Biden in particular, I want you to hear this. This is Megan Dry on Fox Weather last night, talking about what happened with her son, Micah. Here.
I'm so proud of my son because in his last moments, he wasn't screaming for me. He was screaming, Jesus, Jesus, save me. Jesus, I hear you. Jesus, I'm calling upon you. And his wildest dreams and everything that he wanted to be was a superhero. And that was his goal in life. And instead, he's my hero because he reached for something past flesh, past human, past anything that even grown adults, I think, would reach for. My son called out to the one God Almighty. And I think at that moment, he was rescued and he became my hero. And I think all of them carried me through that moment. I think that his biggest dreams, he was the smartest, bravest, hopeful, great friend, great son. I couldn't have asked for a better son. And he was so happy up until the very end when he was screaming for Jesus. And in that moment, I think he found joy.
It's undescribable. 7-year-old Micah. The storm waters rose so high that Megan and her son Micah had to go up to the rooftop of their home for safety. And then the flood became so powerful, and we've seen these images of the water and the rushing water and how powerful it is, that it actually broke their home apart.
Oh, my goodness.
And he got swept away in the water. And that was the last she saw of her son.
As I wipe away the tears, in another story just as chilling, a pregnant woman, North Carolina woman, Emily Russell, in the New York Post details her harrowing story. She is weeks away from delivering a baby. She is very, very full and ready, and she found herself in her home by herself waiting for her husband to come back. The water rushed in, and it went from ankle deep to neck deep. She and her dog were clinging to a mattress, hoping that someone would come and rescue her. And she said at some point there was a piece. She was cold. The water that was surrounding that she was literally floating along in this water, pregnant and just hoping for something. And there came a piece. She said, and how quickly it went from the water was outside of the home, then it rushed in through the back door, and it went from ground to neck level for her. She was waiting for an agonizing 8 hours with her dog floating on a mattress until her husband came. And then she walked out and had to wade through the water, and that almost swept her away as well. This is the time when we need the president to be empathetic, all politics aside.
Not just empathetic, but competent and effective. This is why we have a FEMA. And again, it's impossible to tell these stories and hear these stories without remembering.
You don't even have to be competent to care, Larry.
Yeah.
You don't have to be competent to say somebody do something. Everybody do something.
Well,
and we don't even have that amount of care.
They're missing in action. They're literally missing in action. And by the way, and the myth around Katrina is that actually FEMA was on the ground. They did quite a bit. They couldn't do everything, oftentimes because the state and city government didn't cooperate properly.
That's true.
In this case, the state governments are begging for the help.
They're looking for
FEMA is
help.
not there. J.D. Vance joined Glenn Youngkin in southwestern Virginia, right on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee, to aid in some of the damage there, which has not been bad as in North Carolina, but still very, very bad.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, there have been plenty of eyewitness accounts of people who were down there dealing with this, and there's no one there. And yes, we hear this story about this young 7-year-old boy that is devastating. You tell this story about this pregnant woman that's devastating. We're just beginning to hear these stories.
You're right.
I fear that in the next couple of weeks, this is going to be a nightmare, even bigger nightmare. And Joe Biden, when asked about the storm damage.
Oh, in the storm zone.
Yes, sir.
I'm wondering what storm they're talking about. They're getting everything they need. And they're very happy across the board.
Across the board. It's 8:23.
Now on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:37 now. It's O'Connor and Company. Thanks for tuning in on this Friday. Coming up in 30 minutes, we're going to hand it off to Chris Plant. It's Larry O'Connor with Patrice Onwuka. Still sort of reeling, Patrice, from the audio that we just played of that the devastation of this mother who had to see her 7-year-old son get swept away by the floodwaters and to his death. And no one should have to deal with that and live with it. So it's hard now to sort of make this pivot to talk about the human devastation and the human toll of the Hurricane Helene damage and talk about how it's going to affect the election. But this is a reality, and it's something that we definitely, I want to put everything in perspective here, but it's definitely a significant story here as well, as two of the states that are critical for this presidential election, just 4.5 weeks away, are North Carolina and Georgia, two states that are reeling here. So what will this do to the Electoral College map? Let's bring in Breccan Thies. He's Breccan, thank you for joining us, elections correspondent for The Federalist.
Yeah, good morning. Thanks for having me.
I know you've written about this, and you've been trying to. There's two aspects of this. First, of just the basic get out the vote and the machinations of voting when you don't have electricity, you don't have power, you don't have connectivity, and you don't have roads for that matter. Let's start with that. What is that aspect looking like right now in this area?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, the devastation has been really horrific for Georgia and for North Carolina, and in the place that it's been the worst in North Carolina is Western North Carolina, the Appalachia region, in the mountains, and there's still untold amounts of people without electricity, without kind of basic necessities, and roads are still washed out and destroyed, and buildings are still destroyed, and of course all of that has a major impact on how we are able to conduct elections. Maybe precincts don't exist anymore, but polling places where people can go even register to vote, a lot of, at least initially, and some of them have come back online now, but county boards of elections where all these things take place were offline for a long time, and there are some emergency kind of munitions that some of them have received, some of them have not received, and so what you're really talking about here is the region of North Carolina that is going to carry this state for Republicans if Republicans win it, and you're talking about 1.3 million registered voters over there, and we don't know what it's going to look like because you're still in the recovery phase, and it's getting to 1 month out before the election.
Well, and that's concerning. I mean, both for, I think about the absentee ballots. I think about people showing up to vote in person. Is it correct that typically you would have to show identification to vote in person under state law? And is that changing? So, how will things look different from a voting perspective? And do you think that the officials and apparatus set up is ready to receive or ready to resume at this point?
Yeah, well, that's sort of key to all of this, is that in North Carolina, normally there is a relatively strict ID requirement, both for in-person voting and for absentee voting. So actually, in North Carolina, when you do an absentee ballot, because anyone can request an absentee for any reason, you don't need to have an excuse or anything like that. There's actually a little cellophane window in the envelope you send it back, and that you have to provide a photocopy of a valid identification for absentee. And then, of course, you have to show your ID also when you go vote in person. Now, what the North Carolina State Board of Elections has done, they've come out with a couple of preliminary actions or recommendations, and you know, they're not done. And it should be mentioned that they are a Democrat-run board. They kind of serve at the pleasure of Governor Roy Cooper, and so in this deep red region of North Carolina, they seem to be relaxing some election integrity things like voter ID, like requiring county boards of elections to review absentee ballots every week. Now that's postponed; it's not completely gone. But you're exactly correct about the voter ID thing. On a press call earlier this week with the Board of Elections, you know, they all but told the Western North Carolinians or people devastated by the storm that, you know, just to use a process they have called the ID exception law, which does provide actually specifically for natural disasters within 100 days. But you're talking about people a lot of people probably still have their IDs. There are probably people who don't have their IDs as well who might need an exception. But they basically said, you know, go ahead and cite the exception. And just to put that into perspective of what this looks like for absentee ballots in particular, already over 38,000 absentee ballots have been requested by the 25 counties in the disaster zone. Only 1,000 have been returned. So you're looking at a 37,000 outstanding deficit of absentee ballots that are just floating around in the region. And by the way, just to put that even more perspective, the margin of victory for Donald Trump in 2020 was 75,000. So exactly half the margin of victory of ballots is floating around out there. And what the Board of Elections has said is, like, don't worry about those, you know, come vote in person if you can. And you know, who knows if those ballots are washed away or if they still exist and they're just floating around, and maybe they can be harvested. Who knows?
Breccan Thies of the Federalist has been writing about the potential election fallout from the devastation, specifically in North Carolina. And let's just be clear here. You just said these counties affected, 25 counties. These are predominantly, like, overwhelmingly Republican counties. This is how they generally vote, despite the fact that Asheville itself, that city, seems to be a little bit more of a Democrat enclave there. Beyond that, so the two issues here seem to be, Breccan, the actual legitimate Republican votes that might be hampered from coming in and being counted because of the storm. But then also, if this Democrat-run state board of elections decides to waive basic election integrity protocols that have been put in place because of the storm to accommodate the storm, that could open up the door for shenanigans. So it's basically a double-edged concern here.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And just we can break it down a little bit just so people understand. You know, I said there's 1.3 million registered voters in that region. Less than 300,000 of those are Democrats. About 500,000 are Republicans, and about another 500,000 are unaffiliated, although, like I said and like you just said, this region votes heavily Republican, so even those unaffiliated voters are likely Republican voters as well. And you're exactly right. With the Buncombe County, which is where Asheville is a small part of, like, it is part of it, but it is like kind of the Democrat enclave in a sea of red over there. So that's what we're kind of looking at.
We got to leave it there. Thank you for that reporting. I know you'll stay on top of it. We'll try to stay on top of it, too. We are watching, and basically everything you've just told us sort of sheds some light on a lot of aspects of this, including, frankly, the lack of real urgency from the federal government and from the Biden-Harris administration. Sadly, I prefer not to go there, but we'd be naive not to. Thank you, Breccan.
Thanks, Breccan.
Thank you.
8:45.
Weeknights with Mark Levin, 6 to 9 p.m.
On News Talk 105.9 WMAL, making sense of the news.
Well, Patrice, we've got a jobs number, and this is your wheelhouse. So what are the
Yeah.
jobs numbers?
All right, if you want to believe them.
Yeah, exactly. They're going to reduce it down at some point.
They're going to
anyway.
reduce
Yeah.
it down. But the economy reportedly added 254,000 jobs in September, which beat expectations. Certainly, the unemployment rate ticked down from 4.2 to 4.1%. It looks like we've seen a little bit of wage growth, not adjusted for inflation, though. And I think those are the big headlines. Where the jobs were created, not surprisingly, government continues to be a big driver. Healthcare continues to be a big driver, although not as much as in past months. And food services and drinking places. So I guess restaurants, if they're starting to reopen again, they're hiring those workers. Now, that said, are those high-paying jobs? Maybe in the healthcare industry, depending, but definitely not in the food services industry.
What's your bet when they have to adjust these that they will go? It'll go up or down?
It'll definitely go down.
Right.
Absolutely.
So these are
and
all.
It wouldn't surprise me if you cut this 254 in half to one something. Let's
but
not
we won't
forget.
know until next year.
Well, and let's not forget, we just found out last month that the economy added nearly 1 million fewer jobs than was reported over the past year. So all of those rosy-looking jobs reports over the past year were way exaggerated.
Especially when they're timed for a political cycle, which this one obviously is. 8:52. All right, Patrice, you have a good weekend.
You too.
And
Have
don't
fun.
forget to root for Navy over Air Force
Will do.
tomorrow. Very
Will do.
important. Hello, Christopher Plant.
Tomorrow's the Navy Air Force
Navy
game.
Air Force in Colorado Springs. Big game.
That's big. That's a big deal. But, not as big a deal. You see, Kamala.
Yeah.
You're eligible for $750.
That's
going to change our lives.
$750. It's life altering.
Very
That's
big
quite
of her.
amazing.
Yeah.
She's like Oprah, I think. She's
Yes.
And you get $750. And sorry, your house was completely swept away and your town is gone, but here's $750. Sorry, we had to give illegal aliens your house and your car and your daughter.
Have a good weekend. Go Navy.
WMAL FM, Woodbridge, Washington.